Here, Gotti, just really, really striking and really, really tragic. Gotti?
Wow. Ron, that video that you just showed of the line around that hospital says it all. It is terrifying. It is painful to see, and it's happening in slow motion in front of us. Thank you so much for being there for us, and please stay safe out there. And Rahima Ellis continues our reporting now. She is outside Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan, where drastic measures are being taken to handle the influx of coronavirus patients.
Gotti, here at Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan, they are literally in the process of building a makeshift morgue. You can see the tents that are coming up here. And on the other side of a green fence over there, there are 6 refrigerated trucks, container trucks, that would be used for containing the bodies of those who die from COVID-19. It's not being used now. As I point out, they're in the process of making it. And this would be a realization of their greatest fears, that New York would be overwhelmed with a number of cases, that they would not be able to contain them in the normal process, and they would have to have an overflow facility. And that's exactly what they're putting up here. What you see is a truck that's coming this way, and they are going to build a fence that will not only have a fence here, but they will put a roof over this in order to protect those workers and in order to protect everything that goes on there in the event that it's needed. That's what's happening here at Bellevue Hospital. Gotti, back to you.
With more than 50,000 coronavirus cases in the U.S., doctors are on the front lines, and they are racing to keep up with the influx of patients, as we've been seeing. Dr. Alex Hakim is an ICU doctor at the Providence Little Company of Mary Torrance Medical Center in California. He joins us now live. Doctor, I don't know if you were able to see some of those images, but the things that we are seeing out of New York are staggering. I mean, you've got lines all around hospitals. They are building makeshift morgues. This is becoming crystallized for so many people across the country that have been hearing about it, going outside, seeing that everything is sunny, but yet these images now seem to be bringing home what we're all facing. Can you give us a sense of what you're saying? Is it different here in Los Angeles?
Yeah, it's different in Los Angeles, but what people forget is how many people are still coming to the ICU with strokes, heart attacks, and bad infections. So not only is it COVID-19 that these ICUs are inundated with, so are all the run-of-the-mill things that we normally see every year.
And those run-of-the-mill things that you see every year, if you're waiting in line with a lot of people that are there for COVID-19 and you need some stitches, what is the possibility that you may end up going home with coronavirus?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the resources that are taken up. There is the fear that even an asymptomatic person with a surgical emergency could be spreading this virus. And this virus is, from a healthcare provider perspective, we always have a constant state of fear that, this could infect us. It could have potentially life-threatening consequences to the physicians. So there is a lot of psychosocial dynamics that are going on, not just the logistics, but the psychosocial stuff that the healthcare providers are dealing with. It's hard to focus on what you have in front of you when there's always an ever-present danger ahead of you.
We've been hearing about these shortages of protective gear. What is it about your job in particular? Is there a particular moment that you're most at risk? I know that when you have a patient that might be exhibiting symptoms of COVID-19, obviously you want to take the protection, but is it just about that, or is it about mitigating all across the board?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously have to mitigate across the board because things can lay on surfaces for days, but probably the highest risk procedure, and it's not just ICU doctors like myself, or ER doctors or anesthesiologists, but also the respiratory therapists and critical care nurses and emergency nurses during intubation. So intubation is the process of putting a breathing tube down someone's throat for the dreaded consequence of respiratory failure, or ARDS, that we see in this syndrome. And for patients in that circumstance, a doctor has to look basically directly into the throat of an infected patient, and without proper protection could receive a very high viral load that has been proven lethal in other places in the world to healthcare providers.
Concerned that it will also rise of
wow. So we're talking about intubation for ventilators. This is probably one of the most critical remedies for coronavirus, or treatments for coronavirus. And in order to do that, you were basically risking your health in staring down the mouth of the coronavirus. Is that right? Absolutely.
And I got to tell you, critical care doctors like myself, there's tens of thousands of us around the world. We're used to chaos. We're used to high intensity. We're used to high volumes and making difficult decisions and having to give difficult news to people. One thing that we really haven't experienced as a profession is feeling like we are in personal danger ourselves. And why all these mask donations and PPE conversations, protective gear is so important.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the mental toll? I mean, how are you guys doing? How is the staff at the hospital talking about this? What gets you guys through it?
Yeah. So right now I'm quarantined, self-quarantined with my colleague. I haven't seen my kids for a couple of weeks, and they're both under the age of 2. I haven't seen my wife for 2 weeks, and a lot of the physicians and nurses at my hospital have to self-quarantine themselves, and so you're dealing with a global catastrophe, and then at the same time, some of us are having to deal with it by ourselves and with our fellow coworkers. Surprisingly, though, I have to tell you that the morale is very high. ICU doctors, ICU nurses, I think we've always prepared for moments like this. We've always talked about moments like this. Our hospital, Providence Little Company of Mary, we've actually planned for things like this, and I'm very pleased to say that people are really taking this seriously. And the social media has been really helpful. The news that we get from your station, as well as the direct reports from people that are entering it on Facebook and on Reddit and Instagram. Hearing that stuff weeks in advance has really allowed us to prepare.
And doctor, finally, how's your family doing? You just said that you have some kids at home and a wife, and you're separated from them. It's been a while since you've seen them. How's everybody doing in all this?
My kids are too young to realize what's going on, which is, really weird because, every 2 weeks when you're this young, you add a new skill set, you start saying words that you never said before. So it's just hard to miss moments like that. But, thanks to social media, we Skype together, we WhatsApp together, and I know it's not the same, but it's hard. It's been really difficult because my wife, in a time of crisis, that's when she would like for me to be there the most. So she's really sacrificing a lot for me and my career.
Gosh, doctor, thank you so very much. We are praying for the day that you can hug your family once again, and you are the very definition of a hero. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.
Sure. The state of Georgia has more than 1,000 cases of coronavirus, and more than 40 people have died. Phoebe Putney, the health system, is in one of the hardest hit areas in the state. Our Alex Lioto spoke to Phoebe Putney's CEO about how they're creating makeshift PPEs to deal with the shortage.
We're using 20 or 30 times the amount of personal protective equipment than we normally do. We saw it coming with China. We stocked up. Our first week, we went through 6 months of what our normal use of PPE in 7 days. We burned through that. So I've had a team of 15 people that just work solely on acquiring more inventory, but we've had to go to producing our own equipment. This is an N95 mask. I'm sure everybody's seen these on TV, and so this is made by 3M. This is a certified healthcare mask. This protects healthcare workers, so it blocks droplets coming in, and so this is a critical item to keep our staff safe, and that's our most important thing. We had a team 10 days ago start talking about, should we start sewing our own masks? I tell you, we talked about it on Friday. Everybody kind of laughed, and Saturday we thought a little bit more about it, and Sunday we put it into action. And we have now, this surgical material that we had, this is old surgical draping, and we've got a team of people, more than 100 people, some outside of Georgia, currently sewing these masks together. The pattern is on our website with directions and pictures. To date, we've got about 3,000 of these made, and what we believe is they will be a good cover for that N95 mask. So when a staff member comes out, they can take this off, put it in, and we'll launder these each night. We have a laundry here in town that we run, and they'll be able to continue to use this N95 possibly for their entire shift that day. Normally, when they would go into that patient room, they take this off, throw it away. I think each nurse treating a COVID patient would normally go through probably 6 to 10 of these in a day. We normally pay 58 cents for this N95 mask. We agreed about a week ago to buy 500,000 of them for $7 each. And we put half the money up front. Unfortunately, that deal, we vetted it out as much as we could, but it looks like that deal has fallen through. So that's just where we're at with this. We're having to deal with people that we normally would not consider doing business with. So we believe the old American ingenuity here. We're going to sew these up. We've got teams of people at churches and other places sewing these up. This is going to get us through.
Some years back, my mother, she was terminally ill, and she wanted to make sure that me and my sister and all of our girls had sewing machines, so therefore I have an excessive amount of sewing machines. So I decided to bring them up here, and we're going to put them to work.
And we hope to have about 30,000 within 10 days that we'll be able to salvage and extend our supply chain.
But what it's doing is ultimately preserving the N95 mask.
That's right.
So it's not replacing the mask, it's just preserving it. What happens when you ultimately run out of those N95 masks?
You're going to run out of nurses and doctors. I wouldn't expect a nurse or a doctor to go into a patient's room that has an infectious disease without one of these. We're starting to make these masks. This is a sheet cover, like a protective film, and these are supplies we bought in town. It's a piece of foam, it's a piece of elastic band, and then you would put it on your face, and that would keep our healthcare workers safe from splashing, because you can't find real face guards today. You know, we're confident in this. This is going to keep our patients safe, but we've got a team of people today making these. We think we can make 1,000 a day, but you can't make an N95. The weaving that goes into this, the filtration isn't something that we can replicate here on site.
Where does the federal government come into play here? How much are they helping you?
We've gotten a couple of small shipments from the state, from their stockpile, that probably would last us about a day, and we're very thankful for that. We're running short on everything, but of course masks and shields aren't the only thing we're trying to source. It's ventilators, it's hand gel, it's isolation gowns, it's you name it, we're making sure that we have it.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
This is all I've got left.
Good afternoon from the Spin Room.
It's news made for your streaming world. NBC News Now.
Containment measures that are really strictly enforced will turn out in a week's time or so. And what I can see is
learning from home when they're not going to school. And I think if you can channel your anxiety to doing something productive, and then I think you will find this period will pass eventually. There will be an end to the epidemic, because this is a very standard thing that happens with epidemics. It will end. The question is, after this, will this become like a seasonal flu, where it'll be just around and we just need to manage it? And
you're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
This is all I've got left.
Who brought more to the caucuses?
It's news made for your streaming world. Live weekdays, 3 to 11 p.m. Eastern.
Without this pill, we die.
He's doing the best he can for the country.
This is the perfect time to graduate.
There's like a lot of shooting happening.
It's about how we take care of one another and how we invest in the future.
These are thoughtful voters who, more than anything, want these candidates to cut to the chase.
After initially minimizing the coronavirus threat in the United States, President Trump's response to the outbreak is under increasing scrutiny. Here's a look at how the president's response has evolved over the last several weeks.
Do you have a plan to contain the coronavirus in the U.S.?
We do have a plan, and we think it's going to be handled very well. We've already handled it very well. CDC has been terrific, very great professionals, and we're in very good shape. And I think China's in very good shape also. And now we'll working very strongly with China on the coronavirus. We think we have it very well under control. We have very little problem in this country at this moment.
How concerned are you?
Well, we pretty much shut it down coming in from China. You may ask about the coronavirus, which is, very well under control in our country. We have very few people with it, and the people that have it are, in all cases, I have not heard anything other. Because of all we've done, the risk to the American people remains very low. Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. They tried the impeachment hoax. That was on a perfect conversation. And this is their new hoax. And we're the #1 travel destination anywhere in the world, yet we have far fewer cases of the disease than even countries with much less travel or a much smaller population. A vaccine could not work. You take a solid flu vaccine, you don't think that would have an impact or much of an impact on corona? No. We're discussing before is you really don't know what the percentage is. Some people will have this at a very light level and won't even go to a doctor or a hospital. They'll get better. There are many people like that. Then we made the changes, but the testing has gone very well. When people need a test, they can get a test. It will go away. Just stay calm. Using emergency authority, I will be instructing the Treasury Department to defer tax payments without interest or penalties for certain individuals and businesses negatively impacted. Because of what I did and what the administration did with China, we have 32 deaths at this point. Other countries that are smaller countries have many, many deaths. To unleash the full power of the federal government in this effort today, I am officially declaring a national emergency. Two very big words. There's a very contagious virus. It's incredible, but it's something that we have tremendous control over. It seems to me that if we do a really good job, we'll not only hold the death down to a level that is much lower than the other way, had we not done a good job, but people are talking about July, August, something like that, referring to it, meaning yeah, if you're talking about the virus, no, that's not under control for any place in the world. I think I read. You had said it was. No, I didn't. I was talking about what we're doing is under control, but I'm not talking about the virus. Yes, please. Different. I've always known this is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. All you had to do is look at other countries. I think now it's in almost 120 countries all over the world. No, I've always viewed it as very serious. There was no difference yesterday from days before. I feel the tone is similar, but some people said it wasn't. Today I'm announcing action to help New York, California, and Washington ensure that the National Guard can effectively respond to this crisis. The National Guard, these are tremendous people. They're fully on alert. We've signed what we had to sign, and it's been activated. I'd love to have it open by Easter. Okay, I would love to have it open by Easter. I will tell you that right now. I would love to have that. It's such an important day for other reasons, but I'll make it an important day for this too. I would love to have the country opened up and just raring to go by Easter.
Now, after that evolution from where we began to where we are now, the president's poll numbers have spiked, and recording his best ever job approval ratings. NBC News national political correspondent Steve Kornacki joins us now. Steve, can you walk us through the president's job approval numbers right now? What does that say?
Yeah, I mean, we're starting to get some polling out now that's really measuring where public opinion is now, a week or so into this state of significant social distancing. And you see there it's 47% on average. That's the Real Clear Politics average approval rating. They've been tracking this basically his entire presidency. That's the highest mark. Now, there's two ways of looking at that, I think. Number one, it is the highest mark. It's been, 3 years on now into this presidency. He has not been higher than that. So that's significant for him. Worth pointing out, too, 47% by any historical standard. That's not a great number for past presidents. Trump hasn't even been able to get up past 50% at any point in his presidency. So we've been talking about a presidency where the margins have been really tight, have been really narrow here when it comes to Trump's approval rating. He really doesn't budge outside of a very tight and very narrow range. And so I think it's interesting to see that number hit 47%. It raises the question of whether it could go higher. It could get into territory that's sort of uncharted for him his entire presidency. It could stabilize here and stay here. This could prove to be a blip. It could fall back down, or as this all plays out, this could fall down a lot further. It seems there's just all sorts of possibilities here. Obviously, nobody knows where the pandemic itself is heading exactly and how the public is going to react to it. But initially, at least, now that these major steps have gone into place, you are seeing, I would say, a slight but significant increase in Trump's support.
And we've seen this Trump support and his base be very steady throughout this, as you were just talking about. Any idea on where this bump in support is coming from?
Yeah, so it's tough to say because, again, it's such a, relatively speaking, it's small. When you're going from 45 to 48 or something, normally that's not a major move. It's only significant, I say, just in the sense that with Trump, the numbers have been so tight. Yeah, at his worst, his absolute worst. For instance, in the Gallup poll has been conducted weekly throughout Trump's presidency. At his absolute worst, he bottomed out at 35% approval in the Gallup poll. And that was back in 2017. He had 3 different occasions in 2017 where he hit 35%. He's basically, though, been over 40 in the Gallup poll for some time right now. And so the range, it has been about 40 to 45, I would say, for Trump. So to move up to 46, 47, you're not talking about big movement in any one group. It is sort of tough to look at that way, but you're looking at, I'd say, a small but significant almost cross-section of people that are now saying they approve who previously didn't. And from Trump's re-election standpoint, I think that's been the way folks have been looking at this. If his approval rating is in the high 40s, if it could be 47, 48, certainly 49, something like that, he's in position at that point, I think, to very realistically get reelected. If it's more like the mid-40s or certainly the low 40s, reelection becomes a much more dicey prospect for him.
And it seems like the importance of that number is that it's very close to half the country. If the election was held today, who do you think would come out on top?
It's interesting. There was another poll out this week, one of these polls that showed Trump doing better than he's done his entire presidency. It was the Monmouth poll. And Monmouth had his approval rating up higher than they'd recorded it before. They also did a head-to-head. There it is, Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. This is the Monmouth national poll this week. So it's Biden 48, Trump 45. And I think one thing to keep in mind when you see those numbers, 48, 45, remember the national popular vote in 2016, the Clinton-Trump race, was Clinton 48 and Trump 46. So really what you're seeing in this Monmouth poll here looks very, very similar to what the national popular vote was in 2016. Of course, in 2016, we were sort of reintroduced to the reality that presidential elections are not decided by the popular vote. It's by the Electoral College. And I think that's one of the things that you look at with Trump. He had an advantage in the sort of specific geography of the Electoral College. And I think there's a sense that advantage still persists for him. So for Trump to be down 2 or 3 points in a national head-to-head poll like that, I think that puts him in position where it's very realistic he could pull off what he did in 2016 and get just the right number of votes in just the right selection of states to get the electoral college majority. So I think for Democrats, they want to be more than 3 points ahead of Trump. They could win the election. If it is 48-45 on election day, maybe that works out for them in the electoral college. But I think the way Democrats are going to look at these polls this year with Trump is they want to see themselves more than 3 points ahead because they want to have some breathing room for the electoral college after what happened in 2016.
And the best part about all of this is that tracking Kornacki continues even when he's at home. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Sure. And markets are closing the day up after the Senate passed a historic $2 trillion stimulus package overnight. To answer more of your questions about the stimulus, we have NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhle. Stephanie, a staple in that stimulus package is the direct checks to Americans, but how soon could we actually see that money?
Well, thanks for having me. Let's remember it's made its way through the Senate unanimously. Most likely it'll make its way through the House. Then the president has to sign off on it, which according to Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, he most likely will. If all of those things happen, Secretary Mnuchin says people should expect it in about 3 weeks. If you really want to ensure that you get it the quickest, make sure you have got direct deposit set up. Go to irs.gov to do it.
And we're getting a lot of questions about who's eligible for these checks. So what does it mean for people that are living on Social Security? Okay. And what does it mean for people that may not be employed?
All right. So let's just walk you through it. Every American who makes $75,000 or less is eligible. If you make between $75,000 and $99,000, you get less than $1,200. And at $99,000 and above, you are ineligible. For every child that you have, that's $500. So let's go to your first question, people who are on Social Security or people who have no income. If you file taxes, they have you in the system, you are eligible, you will get the payment. Now, there are a number of Americans, often low-income Americans, who don't actually file their taxes. This is an opportunity to do so. You need to file your taxes, and here's a positive. There's a good chance a lot of those people aren't just going to get this direct cash payment. They're also most likely due an earned income tax credit and a child tax credit. So they might end up getting a refund as well. So they most likely didn't file in 2018, but they're going to need to do it now.
What about people that might be 16 years old, 17, 18? They're still under their parents as dependents, but they are starting their job and they've got they're paying into Social Security. Are they going to get a check too, or do they fall under their parents?
The $500 is only applicable if your kids are 16 years older or younger. So if they're older than that, they can go out and they're filing taxes. They can be eligible for the $1,200. Now, I can tell you there are still a lot of questions out there. Someone asked me, well, what if I had a baby this year? They would, in a month, they wouldn't show up. We don't have an answer yet. So if you reach out to the IRS, they're currently saying until this thing gets passed, we're not giving any more information. So I know there's still a lot of gray area, but people should assume this thing is going to get passed. And there are details, there are specifics that apply to certain people. We should have those answers really in the next week or so.
And one viewer asked us about her husband, who does not qualify for unemployment because he is a self-employed contractor. Will this change under the stimulus bill?
Well, this wouldn't connect to the stimulus bill. The stimulus bill is all about how much money. Listen, he still files taxes, so the government knows whether he works for a company or he works for himself. They're going to know if he made more than $99,000. But that person might be asking about him applying for unemployment. Here's what's interesting. What the Senate has passed in terms of unemployment is separate from the state unemployment offerings. Chuck Schumer said, consider this like unemployment on steroids. This, unlike most, actually applies to those who are self-employed, those who are freelancers, gig economy workers. Because when so many policies were put in place, there wasn't even such a thing as a gig economy. So under this special arrangement that the Senate has put forward, those people are eligible. And unlike most unemployment, where oftentimes you have to wait 7 days after losing your job to even apply, or you only get a portion of your income, usually 50 or 60%, this, according to the Senate, will be more like 100%. and you're most likely going to get it for 10 months. And one other accommodation. Usually, if you're on unemployment, you have to show that every week you're out there seeking employment. That's not the case because for so many people who just lost their income, there's nowhere for them to go get a job.
And Stephanie, what about mothers that may have just given birth this year and they did not have that child on their last tax returns because they were born in January or February? What happens then?
The IRS, we actually asked the IRS that question this morning. They haven't given us those details. So I would put that in the column of, as soon as this thing gets passed, here's the list of questions we need the IRS to answer. Another one that I would say is in that same vein. In this stimulus bill is a huge accommodation for small businesses, and it's tied to not laying off your employees. $350 billion that are loans that'll be forgiven, so that means they're grants, where they're willing to give small businesses, any company under 500 people, a stipend, a loan, money that could be for payroll expenses, rent, supply chain, anything you need, and you won't have to pay it back if you keep your employees on. Now, this is a big question that's hanging in the balance, though. Think about all the companies that in the last 3 weeks already laid their employees off because they had no idea what was going to happen. What happens to those businesses who now want to get those loans, would love to have those employees, but they've already fired them. They've already laid them off. You can't necessarily just hire them back, especially low-wage workers who maybe have said, no, I'm going to go get on unemployment. You can't just snap the fingers and get it right back. You know, Steve Mnuchin said this morning, the Treasury Secretary, people should ignore that 3 million person unemployment number. It's not relevant. Once this bill goes through, the unemployment number will surely be impacted. Most likely it'll go down. But when 3 million people apply for unemployment, that is not irrelevant. It's very relevant.
Absolutely. And speaking of those 3 million Americans, or possibly a number much higher than that, where could they possibly see jobs popping up in the future? Are there any sectors in particular, or is there a possibility that there could be jobs popping up during the coronavirus pandemic that they may be eligible for?
Yes. There might not be the job you just had working at a restaurant or a fitness center, but there are jobs. So let's just talk about it. There are remote jobs you can do from remote access and in-person jobs. So some of the biggest employers out there looking to hire for both remote and in-person: Amazon, CVS, Walmart. You can go on to Amazon.jobs right now, and it's right on their homepage. All you have to do is type in your region where you're located, and you'll see a drop-down box of all the jobs available. They even have jobs for students and internships. So that's for remote access for people who are home and in person. Separately, there are some jobs available now that are only remote. One would be for United Healthcare, another Rosetta Stone, you know, the foreign language app. And that actually makes me sort of depressed because the surge for Rosetta Stone means that there are some extraordinary Americans out there taking their stay-at-home time, bettering themselves, learning a foreign language, as opposed to me, who's focused on stress eating, watching TV, and pulling my children apart. And I would say the last category is only in-person jobs. We're seeing Dollar General and Papa John's both hiring.
Stephanie, you got to give yourself a little bit of credit because you speak the language of Wall Street, and that is a language none of us speak. So thank you so very much for all of that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, I would love to say that during my time off I learned French. It's just not happening.
Well, bonjour. That's all I got.
Adios.
Good afternoon, and thanks everyone for joining in today. Earlier today, I participated in a telephone conference. It was actually a video conference with the White House Coronavirus Task Force led by the Vice President. Participating in that meeting was also the President, and we were able to visit with him. And also early this morning, I had the opportunity to have a phone call with Secretary of the Veterans Administration, Robert Wilkie, and renewed our request that we've forwarded through FEMA for supplemental assistance from the VA, potentially with respect to surge capacity at hospitals here in Louisiana, looking primarily towards New Orleans.